Does this Spanish learner look like you? Look at her. She's studying Spanish, she feels great, she's doing a good job reading Spanish texts and carefully writing out nice Spanish sentences. Do you relate to that? Okay, now how about this one? This Spanish learner is using all of her Spanish face-to-face. She's not just studying it, she's speaking it and understanding it with confidence. There's a big difference. If you feel like you're pretty good at Spanish when you're alone, but you freeze up when you're speaking face-to-face, stick around. We're going to cover 5 simple steps to speaking Spanish face-to-face with confidence. To understand these 5 steps, let's talk about this gap that we have to bridge. What is it that's going on in your head when you're face-to-face rather than when you're just studying on your own? Well, it turns out they're 2 very different things. When you're studying Spanish by yourself, you're able to give it your full focus. So all of your mental capacity is available for making sure that you're expressing yourself well and understanding the Spanish that you're reading and hearing. But when you're face-to-face with someone, there are other things on your mind. Not just Spanish grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation. Suddenly, you also have to think about a lot of social things. You're thinking about what kind of impression you're making, the emotions of the person you're talking with, your own facial expressions and body language. That's a lot to juggle at once. So your brain gets overloaded when you combine all of that with trying to speak a second language. So what we're going to do now is bridge that gap with 5 stepping stones. So imagine that this is those Spanish skills that you're already confidently using when you're on your own. We're going to carry them step by step all the way up to using them face-to-face. And we're going to do that by following a step-by-step process. So here are those 5 stepping stones. The first one is studying solo, but making sure that you're speaking out loud. One of the reasons you might lack confidence when you're speaking face-to-face is that you're not doing enough practice of the actual physical skill of speaking out loud when you're studying on your own. Now, I'm guessing you're probably already doing this some, but make sure to do it as much as possible. When you see Spanish written out, don't just nod and say, "Oh, I understand that." Speak it out loud. This is a super important first step, because taking things from just studying them to speaking them face-to-face starts with speaking them when you're studying them. Okay, the second step is to speak out loud when you're studying, but without looking at the text. This is super important because when you're speaking face-to-face, you can't see Spanish text written out in front of you. So let's say, for example, that you read the Spanish sentence, "Quiero que las cosas estén aquí." Step 1 would be to make sure that you don't just read it, but you say it out loud. Quiero que las cosas estén aquí. But then step 2 would be to cover it up, look away, and try to say it from memory. Quiero que las cosas estén aquí. This puts you one step closer to speaking Spanish out loud, spontaneously, face-to-face. Now, you can have some fun with this second step, so maybe look at a picture of someone that you want to speak Spanish with and say it to the picture. Or if that's too creepy or weird, just stare off into the horizon, maybe look at a mirror, look at something other than the Spanish text, and make sure that you do have the confidence to say a verbatim sentence that you just read out loud while you're not reading it. All right, step 3 is a little bit harder. So you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to do variations on the sentence. So for example, if the sentence was, "Quiero que las cosas estén aquí," you might look away and say, "Quiero que mis amigos estén ahí." That's a variation on the sentence. It's pretty much the same sentence, but you came up with something new while you weren't looking at Spanish text. That means it's a little bit closer to making up Spanish sentences when you're in a face-to-face situation. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. To take this one step further, you might imagine a conversation topic that you might be talking about in the near future, maybe some conversation you're going to have with a colleague at work or with a loved one over the phone. Imagine that topic of conversation, and when you come up with the variations on the sentence that you just read while you were studying, imagine you're having that conversation and try modifying the sentence to fit the topic of a conversation you might be talking about. If you make this a habit, creating variations on sentences while not looking at the text and saying them out loud, you'll be a lot closer to making up your own Spanish sentences when you're face-to-face. All right, step 4 is a tricky one. Having an actual conversation, but in a situation that's really controlled. Basically, a rehearsal conversation. So you've already been having great success practicing Spanish on your own, and you've been having success coming up with your own variations on those Spanish sentences while not reading text. Now, try to do that while you're looking at a native Spanish speaker who's practicing with you. Remember, this is just step 4, so it's not a high-pressure conversation. The goal here is you're just practicing with somebody who understands that this is just a practice conversation, so the pressure is really low. This is exactly what we do with our coaching students, but you can find a friend or someone else you trust who can help you work on your Spanish in a controlled environment. Basically, tell somebody that you trust that you're planning to have a real Spanish conversation sometime in the near future. So to prepare for that, you want to have a conversation with this person as kind of a rehearsal for that, where it's a little more controlled, it's a little easier, it's okay if you get stuck and have to look words up. This just helps you bridge that gap between where you're just studying on your own and where you're actually talking with someone in the wild where you don't know what's going to happen. Now, I have to point out that a lot of students think that step 4 is what they need the most of. They need controlled environments where they can speak face-to-face to practice everything that they've been studying and put it into real-life conversation. But honestly, we found that steps 1, 2, and 3 are exactly as important as step 4. So those controlled conversations you have in rehearsal with your coach or your tutor or whoever's practicing with you are going to be so much more fruitful if you've done the first 3 steps before you start that conversation. And then finally, step 5 is to go out and have a real conversation face-to-face with someone who's not your coach or tutor and where you don't know what's going to happen. And yeah, that's scary, but it's a little less scary than it would be if you didn't do all 5 steps so that you're leading up to taking everything you're practicing and turning it into speaking spontaneous Spanish face-to-face. By following all 5 steps, you're training yourself to be able to open your mouth and just say spontaneous Spanish confidently, which is going to be so much easier because of all that training you've done. And if you follow these 5 steps consistently every single week, you'll be speaking spontaneous Spanish effortlessly very soon. By the way, if your ultimate goal is to know Spanish so well that you can think in Spanish, I'm about to release another video with 7 steps to thinking in Spanish. If you want to see that video when it releases, subscribe to this channel and you'll get that and all the rest of our tried and true study techniques for achieving genuine Spanish fluency.